Well, hey there, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode of Learn BMX Racing. Now, this episode is going to be all about what parts you should upgrade on your BMX race bike. And I have to thank one of my viewers, actually, for the idea for this video. I posted the question a while ago, what people wanted to see, and a viewer named Jillian said that upgrading parts on the bike was something she was curious about. I thought that was a great idea, so that's what we're doing for this video. The most ideal parts to upgrade are obviously a matter of opinion. If you ask 10 different people what you should upgrade, you'll get 10 different answers. But I will say that I do have reasoning behind all of my answers, and I can explain to you what I think you should upgrade and why. A while ago, I made a video talking about the fact that it's very difficult to get a bike to fit properly. So all of the things that I am going to suggest for upgrades revolve around changing components which will benefit the ergonomics of the bike. So, in order, the most important thing I think to change are the handlebars. Next, I would say the grips. After that, the pedals. Then the tires, followed by the seat. After that, if you're an older rider, this doesn't matter so much, but if you're a younger rider, the cranks are an important thing to change. And that's pretty much all the stuff that covers the way that the bike handles. And when it comes to performance, the most important thing to change is your chainring. So let's get into all of those parts and explain why those are the most essential things to change. The reason that I say that the handlebars are one of the most important things is because the handlebars really alter the way that your body is interacting with the bike, right? So let's say, for example, if your handlebars are too low, right, you're going to be way down here. And as you're riding, that's going to be really uncomfortable, really awkward, and you're not going to have a lot of control over the bike. And of course, the same thing applies if your bars are too high. If your bars are way up here, again, that's just an awkward, weird kind of position, right? So the handlebars, and sometimes the neck as well, because you might need to move the bars forward or back, but the height and the width of the handlebars is definitely one of the most important things to change, because a few inches of difference in height makes a really big difference in your entire body, right? Your whole torso is going to be moving up and down. The whole angle of your body changes a great deal just from a few inches of movement in your handlebars. My BMX race bike came with handlebars which were only 7 inches high. Now, I'm not a very tall guy and I have relatively short limbs, so 7 inches was way too short. I upgraded those 7-inch stock handlebars to these 9-inch race bars made by TNT. However, the TNT bars were a little too wide. I prefer bars that are about 28 inches in width, and these were 30 inches, so I carefully cut an inch off of each end. And raising the bars an extra 2 inches made a huge difference, so I didn't need to change out the neck. But keep in mind, like I said, you can buy necks which are higher and longer or shorter, so you may need to change the neck too in order to get your handlebars in the most ideal position. Once you have a properly sized set of handlebars, you want to get good grips. Now, depending on how often you ride and the density of the rubber, grips can wear out pretty quickly, so you may need to replace these as frequently as once a year. Now, I really like all of the ODI lock-on grips since they are extremely easy to install and remove. My favorite grip patterns are the Vans grips, which use the same rubber pattern as the sole of Vans shoes. They offer a nice combination of grip and comfort. You want grips that are soft enough that they don't hurt your hands, yet you want them to be hard enough that you still feel you're in control of the bike. You don't want grips that are so squishy that they make the bike feel unresponsive. Once your hands are connected to the bike in a comfortable way, move on to your feet. Next, I changed the pedals. The stock pedals were metal, which was good. I definitely prefer metal pedals over plastic, but the cleats on the stock pedals were molded into the pedal and were not very grippy. So as a result, it was easy for your foot to slip off the pedals, which were included on the bike. So I found these aluminum pedals from BC with screw-in cleats, and they are fantastic. Now, since I always wear traditional waffle weave Vans, the soles of my shoes grip into these pedals really well. Now that you have changed the parts where you are interacting with the machine, you want to make sure that the bike is interacting with the ground properly. So take a look at having the correct tires. Now, my race bike came with Tioga Power Block tires, which are very common and popular on race bikes today. However, those tires are not very good for tracks that have any sand or gravel on them. So I took off the Power Block tires and replaced them with Maxxis Holy Rollers. Now, depending on where you live and the conditions of the tracks you ride, you need to decide what type of tires are best for you. Do you ride a lot of glued tracks with asphalt turns? Well, then you might want a smooth freestyle kind of tire like the Tioga Power Block. But if you ride traditional dirt and mud tracks with sand and loose gravel, you may want something more grippy like the Tioga Comp 3 or Maxxis Holy Rollers. Now, changing the seat isn't incredibly important on a race bike since you spend most of your time on the bike standing up. But for me, I often sit down at the gate, or I'll sit down when I'm just hanging out at the track and talking to people. So in those moments, it's nice to have a comfortable seat. I swapped out the hard plastic seat that came with my bike for something a little softer, the Insight Pro pivotal seat. The final ergonomic part I'll mention is the cranks. For teens and adults, you probably don't need to alter the length of your cranks. The length of a crank arm is measured from the center of the spindle hole to the center of the pedal hole. Now, I didn't change the cranks on my bike. These are stock 180 millimeter cranks. Now, for teens and adults, cranks average 175 millimeters in length. Crank length is not that important for teens and adults because 170, 175, and 180, they're all so similar. However, for younger children whose legs are still growing, the crank length could potentially make a huge difference in your cadence and rotation. Now, Renan has some really cool cranks for children that are adjustable. So, if you're a very young rider, those might be helpful to get your pedal stroke set properly. Finally, let's talk about changing out the chainring. Now, I don't want this video to be a really detailed explanation of bicycle gearing, but the basics are this. Most bicycles come with gearing where you have 16 teeth on the rear cog and you have 44 on the front chainring. Now, the larger you make the chainring, in other words, the more teeth that you have up front, the harder the bike is to pedal, the harder it is to get the bike started, but the faster the top speed of the bike will become. And the opposite is true for the cog in the rear. The smaller that you make the cog, the harder the bike is to pedal, but the higher the top speed. Now, on most bicycles, you don't want to mess with the rear cog because changes in the rear are much more dramatic than changes to the chainring. So, this bicycle came with 43/16 gearing, which is a little low. Like I said, 44/16 is normal. So there were a lot of people who commented on the fact that I was kind of spinning out when I first bought this bike. And in other words, I was pedaling really fast, but the bike wasn't going any faster. So I decided to upgrade from a 43 tooth chainring to a 45. That's only 2 teeth larger, but it makes a huge difference. Now, I actually cannot ride this bike on the track at my top speed because I get a little too squirrely on the jumps and I don't really have the skill to control the bike when it's going as fast as it can. So for me, upgrading to a 45 was perfect. Now I suggest that when it comes time for you to want to make your bike a little faster, don't go up more than 1 or 2 teeth, because like I said, it can make a really big difference. So if you're on a 44, you can go up to a 45 or a 46, but like don't jump from 44 to 47 or 48, because that's way too much. Everything that I have ever done for Learn BMX Racing has obviously focused on BMX racing. But for this video, I want to teach you a little bit more. Instead of just showing you what I upgraded on my BMX race bike, I can also show you this, my Fatbike mountain bike. This is a Mongoose Dolomite ALX. And I'd like to show you some of the things that I've changed on this bike as well, just to kind of give you a general idea of what is possible to change and why you might want to change it. Although fat bikes have been around for about a decade, a lot of people are still very unfamiliar with them. And they don't understand what's the difference between a regular mountain bike and a fat bike. Well, the big difference is the tires. The tires on this bike are about 4 inches wide, and the reason that you want to have these incredibly wide tires on the bike is because it gives you more surface area to ride on terrain like this. So here's some footage of me just kind of randomly cruising through the chaparral in the Mojave Desert, which is incredibly fun, and it's something that you simply cannot do with any other kind of bicycle. Riding through snow and sand, you would sink into it if you rode a regular mountain bike or a BMX bike. So a fat bike allows you to really easily kind of cruise over this terrain and experience bicycling in conditions that you otherwise could never, ever experience. This is what a stock Mongoose Dolomite looks like when you first purchase it and haven't changed anything on the bike. One of the first things I changed was this, the neck. The neck is just a little bit too long, and it made the handlebars a little too far away from me. So I changed it to this right here. So you can see this neck is much, much shorter and pulls the bars much closer to your body. The distance of the handlebars is actually a really great example of the type of ergonomics on a bicycle that most people just don't even think about. So when you're sitting on a bike, you're typically, your body is fairly upright, right? Now, think what happens if my body is fairly straight. If the handlebars are out too far, what does the rest of my body do? Well, if the handlebars are up here, now my whole back is angled, right? And I have to lift my head up in order to compensate for that, right? Whereas if you're up here, your neck and your head is nice and straight, right? But as you lean forward, now you're looking at the ground. So if you got to go too far forward, then you have to pick up your head. So now you got this kind of crink in your neck. And that's not a big deal if you're riding for 10 minutes, but if you're riding for an hour, right, with your head picked up, then all of a sudden your neck starts hurting, your shoulders start to hurt, and the reason that everything is in pain is because your handlebars are too far forward. And a lot of people don't even think about that, right? They're just like, oh, why is my neck so sore? They never think, well, my handlebars are too long, or my handlebars are too far away from me. So that's why it's important to understand kind of the biomechanics of a bike so that when you start to have issues and discomforts, you know what you need to do in order to fix it, While we're on the topic of the handlebars, the next thing that I like to change is the grips. These happen to be ODI grips that have these kind of lock-on styles of affixing to the handlebars. So you can see those two red rings on either side. Those actually tighten down so that it makes it extremely easy to install and remove the grips. Another thing I like to change out are the pedals. Again, because every single component that you're really interacting with the bike with are components that I think it's important for them to be really dialed in and really good. So these pedals, you notice a pattern here. Everything that I've changed on this bike is red. I thought that would just be a cool kind of color combination to go with the black and the matte gray. But these pedals are the same pedals that I have on my BMX race bike. I just really like these a lot. They're very grippy and they're reasonably priced, and they also aren't too grippy. So that's the cool thing about these pedals, and I've started to put them on pretty much everything I ride. In terms of comfort and ergonomics, the last thing I changed out is the seat. The seat on a mountain bike is really important because you're sitting down a lot while you're doing things like riding uphill. So these type of seats with that hollow cutout are really comfortable and really nice. I like these kind of seats a lot. While we're on the topic of the seat, here's a quick tip on finding the proper seat height. You all know your inseam measurement for pants, right? Like the length of your pant leg from the crotch seam to your ankle is your inseam. Now, to adjust your seat to the proper height, get a tape measure and your bicycle. Turn your cranks so the crank arms are aligned with your seat tube. Measure from the top of the lowest pedal to the top of the seat. That length should match your inseam. If your inseam is 30 inches, then the distance from the top of your pedal to the top of your seat should also be 30 inches. Now, this will get you close to where your seat should be, but you may still need to raise or lower the seat by an inch or two. So how do you know your seat is adjusted correctly? Well, there should always be a slight bend in your knee through the entire rotation of a pedal stroke. So if your knee is bent really far at the bottom of your pedal stroke, the seat is too low. If your knee goes completely straight at the bottom of your pedal stroke, the seat is too high. And if you experience pain in your knee or your lower thigh right above your knee, you're putting too much pressure on your knees from the seat being too low. And if you experience pain in the tendons behind your knees or in your calves or Achilles tendon, your legs are straightening out too much from your seat being too high. Now we get to a few things I changed out purely for aesthetic reasons. So right here you can see my good old dice caps. I always love putting dice caps on a bike, and I put on red dice caps to match with that kind of red theme. And you also see these red circles here. These are actually rim strips, and the stock rim strips are black on the Dolomite, and Fatbike rims, they often have these holes cut out in them just to kind of save on weight. And I just thought it would look really cool to have red in there. And you'll also notice the rim itself has a reflector on it. Now, it's a little bit hard to see because it's black, but the thing that's really cool about these reflectors is that they actually reflect white. And I could show you that when we get to slightly darker footage right here. So here we can see, if I zoom in again, you can kind of see the rim strips, but when I put a light on them, now they really stand out. So it's just kind of a really cool aesthetic, and it's something that's, I think looks way better than the standard reflectors, because now you're still perfectly legal. You can ride the bike at night. You have reflectors as is required, but you don't have to have the ugly plastic ones. And then here's one of my headlights that I attached to the handlebars. So again, you can see kind of what the lighting is like, and the setup that I have for that, for riding in the evenings. And then finally right here, you can see the reflector light that is on the rear of the bike. And that pretty much covers all of the stuff that I changed on the Dolomite. So, there wasn't a lot that was changed because this is just a pretty cool bike just as it is. I only had to change a few little things, and now you see what my Dolomite is like.
Dolomite is my name, and f***ing up motherfuckers is my game.
And finally, let's go over this bike, my 2006 Haro Back Trail. It started out as a dirt jumper, and I changed it into a flatland freestyle bike. Almost nothing on this bike is original. Every single part and component has been switched out and upgraded to something different. So, let me show you what I changed, and I'll explain to you why I changed it. To show you the evolution of this bike, this is a picture of the 2006 Haro Back Trail in the Haro catalog. So this is what it looked like when I bought it from the store. Then I transformed it into this. So I use this bike a lot to go on like night rides and go up by the Hollywood sign. So I had like 5 lights on the front of the bike and would ride up the mountain in the dark, and it was really kind of cool and it was a lot of fun. Then I took everything off the bike and I stripped it down to this. So this is sort of the foundation that I started from to make the freestyle bike. Here is what the bike looks like transformed into a freestyle bike. And I really, really love the color scheme that I have on this thing. Basically what I did is I made every single component on the bike either black, white, or chrome. The only exception to that being the frame, which is the original rust color, and the sprocket, which is gold. And I have to give credit where credit is due. The gold sprocket was inspired by my friend Annabella Hammonds. Bella is a really great BMX racer here in Southern California, and I absolutely love her bike with this kind of metallic gold and pink color scheme. And so that sort of inspired me to put in this one little splash of gold on my bike and see how it worked. And I love it, and I think it looks really cool. So thanks to Bella, I had that idea. I came up with this color combination by using this great bike configuration tool on this website from a bike shop in Stuttgart, Germany called Kunstform, which means art form in German. I configured the bike to show my original colors, then I slowly began to experiment and change things. Alter the pedals, put on the gold sprocket, add a silver chain, change to white tires. And going through this configuration process online allowed me to experiment with color combinations and find a nice aesthetic look for the bike before I purchased a single part. This bike is kind of a Frankenstein amalgamation of parts from the 80s, the turn of the century, and 2022. I think of it as the bicycle version of synthwave. You know, it's new and modern, but it sounds like it was written in the 80s. That's this bike. It has the sensibilities of 80s freestyle with more modern technology and parts. Take the handlebars, for instance. These are brand new handlebars from a 1987 Haro FST FSX, which were never installed on a bicycle. I bought them around 2009 and had them sitting around for the past 12 years before installing them on this bike. Now the grips are brand new ODI lock-on grips with the Vans waffle sole grip pattern. So these are 35-year-old bars with brand new grips on them. And the brake levers are also brand new Tech 77 levers from Dicomp. But the Tech 77 levers have remained unchanged in design since the 1980s. So again, we have a 35-year-old design, but the levers are brand new. Now the neck is an old Supercross Sammy Cools stem. Samantha Cools was a Canadian BMX Olympian, and I got this stem because back in 2009, it was one of the only top-loading threadless stems that I could find. The brake cables are a standard Odyssey slick cable in front and a gyro cable for the rear. One thing I notice on a lot of bikes is the curve of the lower cables is often a bit too tight, which can make the brakes fail to pull smoothly. So I always make sure that my lower gyro cables come down straight off the gyro tabs and have a nice curve to them. This is achieved by making sure the lower cable is cut long enough so there is sufficient back pressure on the cable housing, which keeps the curve very fluid. Now the front brake is routed through a Potts mod bolt and the cable guides on the fork. I also make sure the bottom of the front cable loop is on the inside of the fork. When people route the cable to the outside, your foot can get snagged on the cable when you step on the front axle peg. So it's important to route the cable on the inside of the fork instead of the outside. The brakes themselves are TRP FX950s. Unfortunately, they are no longer being manufactured, even though I think they may be one of the best U-brakes ever designed. They rotate on sealed bearings, which is not a common feature in U-brakes, but it helps them pivot very smoothly. As for the brake pads, I spent many years running the classic Scott Matauser pads, which are renowned in the BMX race and freestyle community as the best brake pads ever. The company Cool Stop bought the rights to Scott Matauser and started making the Cool Stop Eagle 2 pads, which use the same salmon pink compound as the Scott Matauser pads. However, these days, the greatest pads on the market have become the Cool Stop Flatland pads, which are clear and work better than any other brake pad I've ever seen. Oh, and by the way, routing the excess brake cable through the Brazon post hole was that was just kind of a joke. I did it because I thought it was funny and it made me laugh. There's really no other reason to have done that. I was just kind of being silly. The headset is also the most robust one that I could find at the time in 2009. Manufactured by Cane Creek, it is called the Tank Hit headset, and it is just massive. The bearings are enormous and extremely smooth, too. Moving down to the forks, these were a huge challenge to find. The stock wheels on a Haro backtrail have a 14mm axle in both the front and the rear. Now, I wanted to keep the stock wheels, but I also wanted U-brakes in the front. And almost no forks ever made have 14mm dropouts and the Brazon mounts for a U-brake. I finally found these Redline Monster forks, only to discover they had been discontinued the year before. But I ended up purchasing this brand new pair on eBay from a bike shop in Oregon for $10. I was so stoked on that. Now, the reason I wanted to keep these wheels is because they are amazingly strong. They are double-walled 48s, which is, again, a type of wheel I've never seen before. The original 48s were single-walled rims. These are so strong and solid, there's nothing else like them. I went with Kenda Contact tires because they are one of the few tires on the market that you can get in pure white with a nice freestyle tread. Plus, I know they have a decent longevity and take a while to wear out. Lastly, on the wheels, we have the axle pegs, which are made by SE. There's nothing much to tell about these, and they are fairly simple pegs, but I like them because they are one of the few pegs available these days with knurling etched into the metal instead of being smooth. The bottom bracket and cranks are the original Haro 3-piece cranks which came with the backtrail. However, the pedals are of a similar design to the ones on my race bike and Fatbike. In fact, multiple companies make these identical pedals which are milled from CNC aluminum. I suspect that someone just licenses the CAD file for the design and numerous companies make the similar design of pedals. Now, I thought that these were chrome when I ordered them, but they're more of a gray titanium finish. They're the only thing on the bike which doesn't quite match in color, but I still think they look good, although true chrome I think would have been even cooler. The seat is a rather generic white seat that I bought online, but I like the size, the color, and the padding. And like my Fatbike, it has a hollowed out hole in the center to reduce pressure when you're sitting down, which makes it far more comfortable. The aluminum seat post is tall enough to allow the seat to be positioned just in line with the grips of the handlebars. This is important on a flatland freestyle bike so you can grab and hold the front tire at a 90-degree angle to the frame of the bike for certain tricks. And luckily for me, this height is also pretty close to the proper seat height, so it's still in a comfortable range for riding while seated. The final thing to call out is the drivetrain. So this bike originally had a 36-13 gear ratio, and that is what I am running right now. Now, 36-13 is pretty much identical to 44-16 in terms of the gear inches. One odd thing, though, is that the frame isn't quite built to line up with the wheel set. So if you look at the sprocket, you can see it's moved as close to the frame as possible with only one spacer. However, the chain is way too far to the left. Now, looking at the rear cog, you can see the chain is too far to the right. So if you measure this setup, the cog and the sprocket are misaligned by about 3 or 4 millimeters. The only way to get this into alignment is to move the sprocket closer to the frame, which, like I said, is impossible because there's only one spacer in there. Now, the other option is to move the cog further away from the hub, which is also impossible because the lock ring, which holds the cog in place, only has about 3 millimeters of thread. So this setup works and the chain rotates smoothly, but you have to use a chain like the KMC S1, which has very thin plates, allowing the chain to move a little side to side. Originally, I tried to install a half-length chain, and it simply didn't work because the curvature of the plates would snag on the teeth of the cog as the chain engaged, and it would click with every rotation. Using a KMC S1 solved the problem. Now, if you compare the chain alignment on my BMX race bike, it is absolutely perfect. The drivetrain on my 2019 Chase Edge race bike is flawless, from the front chainring following all the way back to the rear cog. If you measure it out, it is aligned to the millimeter, and that includes after having changed out the chainring. It still lines up perfectly. So the frame and the drivetrain of the Chase is definitely far more precise than that of the Haro Back Trail. My favorite rides on this bike are just cruising around the beach. Back in 1987, when I was a 16-year-old boy learning to do tricks on my freestyle bike, this was my dream. I wished I was here, living in California, being out at the beach on a warm summer day, riding the bike trails, enjoying sunshine and palm trees, and now, here I am, living the dream. Sure, maybe I'm not 16 anymore, but who cares? Life is about making all your dreams and hopes come true, no matter if it takes you 1 year or 40 years. The point is to attain those aspirations. I can still do some simple freestyle tricks too. I can still do a rather sketchy infinity roll. I can still ride backwards. And I can even ride with one of the pioneers of freestyle, Martin Aparijo. I idolized Martin so much, I had a picture of this dude inside my locker in high school. And now I can ride with him at the beach. Life is good, man. Life is good. My good old days are happening right now. And you know what? Don't forget, so are yours. Your good old days are happening right now.